Well, just when the federal government thought it had fixed one of its most serious political problems by rejigging its mining tax, rebellious miners this week remobilised their media assault at the most sensitive of times, right in the middle of the election campaign. While the biggest players, BHP, Rio and Xstrata, declined to join the fray, the smaller iron ore and coal miners say the confusion surrounding the tax is seeing doors in the investment and capital markets slammed in their faces. Now, one big miner who hasn't laid down arms is Fortescue's chief and founder, Andrew Forrest, and I caught up with him this week to see why he's fighting on when the big miners have stopped. Well, Andrew Forrest, there's a very interesting background to all this, because you've said that you had been negotiating with Kevin Rudd before he got sacked about changes to the RSPT. Now, was what you were negotiating similar to what ended up being announced by Julia Gillard?
Well, we'd had those vigorous invitations by the Prime Minister. Here's your Prime Minister. So we said, sir, yes, sir, to get over to the Lodge and to negotiate a potential solution to the RSPT, to defuse that bomb.
And you were negotiating in the Lodge, were you?
We were. And so our purpose was to create a discussion paper. Our final condition, and it was one of those irrevocable conditions, was that it had to be discussion purposes only. Now, the Prime Minister had agreed to that, so I think a day or two later he was to announce to the Australian people a discussion paper which he'd negotiated with us for the whole mining industry to give comment and feedback. That would have taken, of course, several months in an open and transparent manner. But as you know, as it transpired immediately thereafter, the Prime Minister wasn't able to defuse the bomb he'd created. Yeah,
well, as you say, he'd created it. I mean, he'd already made the mistake of ambushing the mining industry with the RSPT in the first place.
Yeah, it was probably the worst hit to sovereign risk I've certainly seen in all my life, but people older than me say, no, it's the worst hit Australia's ever made to how we're viewed as a sovereignty with a stable political platform ever. But you don't decapitate a Prime Minister for making a mistake, I would have thought. He goes if he doesn't fix his mistake, and I do know that Rudd was doing his level best to fix that mistake.
But then you were cut out after Julia Gillard replaced him. She then negotiated with BHP, Rio Tinto and Xstrata, and you were nowhere to be seen.
Well, I have no axe to grind with those three companies. They have more shareholders than Bob Brown will ever have votes. So they had every entitlement to get in there and remove the part which they considered was the retrospectivity part of the tax. But in doing so, it created around $100 billion of tax shelter or more, just on our calculations, that those three will enjoy before everyone else who's captured by the so-called solution will have to pay. And we can't see how that's fair either.
Do you think you are the victim of a conspiracy between the big mining companies and the government?
No, definitely.
To actually almost take that $100 million off you?
Look, no, that $100 billion. I do think that BHP, Rio Tinto and Xstrata acted in an exemplary way when you're asked/ordered by a Prime Minister of a country to come to Canberra and negotiate. You do that out of respect for your country. That's all they did. I feel that the government negotiating something in secret is okay. That's also their prerogative as a government, but not to announce it in secret. They must absolutely do what Kevin Rudd was going to do and produce a discussion paper which everyone can feed into, so we can produce then a result which may have meant paying more tax but would not have allowed that tax to be imposed in a manner that fundamentally hurt Australia.
Well, they didn't have discussion paper in red letters on the thing, but they did say that it's a work in progress, which is why they asked Don Argus to work with Martin Ferguson to continue the consultation process. So why don't you just talk to Don now, rather than put ads on TV?
There's two big mistakes there. One, we're told that the fundamentals of this tax are not up for negotiation, so therefore it's over. They're talking about transition arrangements, which is just how long do you want before you're executed, not will you be executed. So to me that is still a done deal.
So you don't think the tax is actually still on the table, and you don't think that the consultation that Don Argus is running is real?
Now, Don Argus has made a contribution by saying yes, he will be involved. Don Argus, of course, is only been in the mining industry since after he retired from the NAB. He was not well known at the NAB for supporting the mining industry. He became chairman of BHP, and over his stewardship, which did a great job for BHP and many fine things for Australia, he still fought a vicious campaign against Fortescue, who were trying to make BHP and Rio Tinto do what they promised the Australian people they would do, and that's share their infrastructure exactly like Fortescue was doing. Over that whole campaign, I had Don Argus as a ruthless competitor, and now he's on the other side, you know, as almost an unelected member of my board. I don't think that's a solution either.
An unelected member of your board?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Because a tax has been imposed, sorted out by BHP, Rio Tinto and Xstrata, and the government, which has major impacts on how we can develop projects and how we run our own operations, almost as though they were sitting in our board of directors.
I presume your big problem with the MRRT as it now stands is that the taxing point is too close to the mine, which means that your infrastructure isn't taken into account, and also the fact that you're highly geared, so your debt servicing commitments are not deductible from the tax. Isn't it fair to say, though...
I wouldn't accept we're highly geared, but I do accept...
Well, you're debt funding your projects to a large extent.
Every other company apart from the three big majors, we rely on project finance. Everyone does that. That doesn't mean you're highly geared. But if you have a tax which comes in before you can service your bankers, that almost makes it unbankable. Now, we are now talking about quite a dangerous tax for all those people outside of the big three who rely on that common instrument, project finance.
There's no one really in your position. Yes, there are a number of other...
317 out of 320, Alan. I would have thought that's quite a few.
I guess that's true. But look, I mean, is it fair to say that the way you've structured the projects, your projects, and funded them, was a bit of a bet on Australia not introducing a resources rent tax?
No, I wouldn't say that. We did what every company ever does, and that's rely on a sovereign regime which is going to be stable, and taxation principles which can be fine-tuned, of course, but if major changes are going to occur to something as fundamental as tax law, and it's a major change, then it will be discussed with you before it happens, not in hindsight, not as an ambush.
So what do you want changed?
Well, look, fundamental things like the uplift factor comes in at 7%. That happens to be the cost of money of BHP, Rio Tinto and Xstrata, who negotiated the tax. But it's no one else's cost of money. Our cost of money can be 10, 12, 13, 14%. So it should come in at a true cost of money. It should encourage infrastructure, not discourage infrastructure. There's a range of things. You know, interest should be deductible, not pay your tax before you pay interest. Pay this brand new, very heavy tax, which you never knew anything about when you entered into your financing arrangements, before you pay even service that interest.
Now, you're on the brink now of actually becoming a $2 billion a year cash flow company next year. I mean, everything you've worked for is about to basically happen for Fortescue. How much of an impact will the MRRT, as it now stands, have on your earnings and your cash flow and the value of your company?
Well, if the MRRT was negotiated openly and transparently, I could answer that question. All we know now is that there are fundamental issues which are still in secret, we can't get answers for, and therefore we can't really model it. Our broad assumptions are, and we have to guess a little, is that instead of the RSPT making us pay 57%, the MRRT may make us pay around 50%. Now, we can't get specific on that because we don't know what is behind those assumptions. It was done in secret.
Your board is due to make a final decision in the next few months on expanding production from 55 to 95 million tonnes per annum. Is this tax going to derail that decision?
It will have a very, very severe impact on that decision. We're talking around $17 billion worth of new investment. This is a huge tax for Fortescue, which makes a very small contribution to the Australian economy, yet it could potentially derail a massive investment into the economy. That's why it's so short-sighted.
So are you saying it will derail it, or that it might, or
well,
what exactly is it?
Alan, we don't know. If it wasn't done in secret, if it was all out there on the table like Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, when he was in power, was going to do only a couple of days before he was deposed, every company could answer your question. We can't. It was done in secret, and those fundamental questions you're asking, we can't even get answers for.
Thanks for joining us, Andrew Forrest.
Thanks so much, Alan.